Have you ever reached a point in your life when you quietly wondered whether the person you once were had disappeared forever? Perhaps there was a time when you trusted life more easily, laughed without thinking about whether you deserved to feel happy, slept without carrying tomorrow into the night, and moved through your days with a kind of openness that now seems very far away. Then life happened. There were disappointments you did not expect. Relationships changed. People left. Plans collapsed. You discovered things about others that you wished you had never learned. And perhaps you discovered things about yourself that were equally difficult to accept. Somewhere along the way, life became heavier. You became more careful, more guarded, more concerned with what might go wrong. You learned how to keep functioning, but functioning and feeling alive are not always the same thing. And perhaps there have been moments when you have asked yourself a question you rarely say aloud: will I ever feel like myself again? It is a deeply human question. When we have been hurt, we naturally imagine healing as a return. We imagine returning to the confidence we once had, the relationship we once trusted, the life we once expected, or the version of ourselves who had not yet been disappointed. We begin waiting for our comeback. We wait to feel strong again. We wait for confidence to return. We wait for the apology that will finally give us closure. We wait for the right relationship to appear, for our circumstances to improve, for the anxiety to disappear, for our finances to change, or for the future to become clear. And somewhere beneath all of this waiting is an assumption that says, when enough things outside of me become different, then I will finally be okay again. But there is another way to understand your comeback. What if your greatest comeback has very little to do with returning to who you were before life became difficult? What if you are not being asked to rebuild an old identity at all? What if the invitation is much deeper? Perhaps you are being invited to release the identity that was created by your wounds and return to the presence within you that was never wounded in the first place. There is an enormous difference between rebuilding yourself and remembering yourself. Rebuilding suggests that something essential about you was destroyed. Remembering suggests that something essential was simply covered by fear, disappointment, resentment, conditioning, and the many stories you learned to tell about yourself. Maybe you did not lose yourself. Maybe you became distracted from yourself. You may have forgotten yourself while trying to survive something painful. You may have forgotten yourself while trying to earn someone's approval. You may have forgotten yourself in a relationship where keeping another person happy seemed more important than listening to your own inner truth. You may have forgotten yourself while comparing your path with people whose lives appeared to be moving forward more quickly than yours. You may have forgotten yourself while replaying mistakes you would never make with the awareness you have today. This does not mean you failed. It means your attention became absorbed in the noise of the human experience. And the noise can be very convincing. The mind says that you should have known better. It tells you that you are behind. It reminds you of what everyone else appears to have accomplished. It tells you that you missed your chance. It whispers that you must do something extraordinary to prove that you are still valuable. When you listen to these thoughts repeatedly, something subtle begins to happen. You stop seeing them as thoughts and begin treating them as descriptions of who you are. You stop saying, I experienced rejection, and begin believing, I am unwanted. You stop saying, I made a mistake, and begin believing, I am a failure. You stop saying, someone abandoned me, and begin believing, people always leave me. You stop saying, I am going through a difficult season, and begin believing, my life has gone wrong. The ego has a strange habit of taking an experience that occurred in time and turning it into a permanent identity. Something happened. Then the mind created a story about what it meant. And eventually the story became more powerful than the event itself. This is why awareness is so important. Awareness gives you enough inner space to see that what happened to you and who you are do not have to be the same thing. You can notice fear without becoming fear. You can experience grief without becoming grief. You can remember rejection without defining yourself as rejected. You can acknowledge a mistake without turning the mistake into your identity. The moment you can observe a thought, you have already discovered something in yourself that exists beyond the thought. Imagine a storm moving across the sky. For a while, everything appears dark, clouds cover the horizon, rain becomes so heavy that the world seems to disappear behind it. If you judge the sky only by that moment, you might believe the darkness had become permanent. But the storm is not the sky. The storm is moving through the sky. Your emotions can be understood in much the same way. Fear moves through you. Sadness moves through you. Anger, jealousy, uncertainty, regret, loneliness, excitement, hope, and disappointment move through you. Some stay longer than others. Some feel so intense that they appear to occupy everything. But there is still something within you capable of noticing them. Call it awareness. Call it consciousness. Call it spirit. Call it the presence of the source within you. The name is less important than the recognition that there is something deeper than the changing weather of your mind. That deeper presence may have been quiet, but it was never defeated. And this is where your comeback truly begins. Not with revenge, not with proving everyone wrong, not with becoming so successful that the people who doubted you finally regret what they did. There is nothing unusual about wanting those things after being hurt. The ego often imagines healing as a future moment when everyone who underestimated you finally recognizes your value. But notice what happens when your healing depends upon that recognition. The people you are trying to prove something to still control you. Your actions may have changed, but your attention remains tied to them. Your peace is still waiting for their reaction. A deeper comeback requires no audience. Nobody has to regret losing you. Nobody has to admit that they misunderstood you. Nobody has to apologize before you begin living again. Nobody has to notice that you have changed. Some of the most meaningful evidence of healing will never appear on the outside. Perhaps one morning you remember the conversation that once consumed your thoughts, and you notice that your body no longer reacts in the same way. Perhaps you see someone living a life you once envied and feel no need to compare. Perhaps someone misunderstands you and you no longer spend the evening rehearsing explanations. Perhaps an uncertain future no longer feels like an emergency that must be solved tonight. These moments may appear small, but they reveal something enormous. Your attention is returning to you. For a long time, you may have been giving enormous amounts of your life to things that were no longer happening. The argument ended, but you continued arguing with it in your mind. The person left, but you continued having conversations with them in your imagination. The mistake happened years ago, but you continued bringing it into the present as evidence against yourself. The mind does this because it believes that if it analyzes yesterday long enough, it may eventually discover a way to change it. But peace rarely comes from winning an argument with the past. There is wisdom in reflection. There are lessons that deserve to be remembered. But there comes a point when reflection becomes resistance. You are no longer learning from what happened. You are demanding that what happened become different. And no amount of thought can change yesterday. The only place where your relationship with yesterday can change is here. Now, the present moment is not simply another moment in time. Spiritually, it is the only place where you can actually experience life. The past appears now as memory. The future appears now as imagination. Your body breathes now. Your awareness exists now. Love can only be expressed now. Forgiveness can only begin now. Peace can only be experienced now. This is why returning to the present is not an escape from your life. It is a return to your life. There may be grief in this moment. Let yourself acknowledge it. There may be fear. Notice it. There may be exhaustion beneath the version of you that has been pretending to be strong. Meet that exhaustion gently. Many people attempt to heal themselves through rejection. They reject sadness because they believe they should be positive. They reject anger because they believe spiritual people should never feel angry. They reject fear because they imagine fear means they are failing. Then the healing journey becomes another battle against themselves. But you cannot create peace through inner violence. You cannot hate yourself into self-love. You cannot shame yourself into freedom. Healing begins when awareness replaces judgment. Instead of asking, why am I still like this? You can ask, what is this experience trying to show me? Instead of asking, why can't I become the person I used to be? You can ask, who am I beneath everything that has happened? That question changes the journey. Because perhaps the person you used to be is not where you are meant to return. Nature rarely returns to an earlier form. When winter arrives, a tree does not desperately attempt to glue old leaves back onto its branches. What has completed its purpose falls away. The tree becomes bare, not because life has abandoned it, but because life is continuing in another form. What appears empty from the outside may still be deeply alive beneath the surface. Perhaps something similar has been happening within you. There are versions of yourself that were useful once but are no longer necessary. The version who needed everyone to like you. The version who believed being needed was the same thing as being loved. The version who always said yes because saying no felt dangerous. The version who believed strength meant never asking for help. The version who measured worth through achievement. The version who believed that peace would come after one more accomplishment, one more relationship, one more explanation, or one more victory. You do not have to repair every identity you have outgrown. Some identities are meant to fall away, and sometimes what feels like losing yourself is actually losing the mask you once confused with yourself. This can be frightening because the ego depends upon identity. It creates a definition of you from your name, your history, your relationships, your achievements, your appearance, your possessions, your successes, your failures, and other people's opinions. It says, this is who I am. But every one of those things can change. A relationship can end. A career can change. Money can come and go. The body changes. Other people change their minds. Reputation changes. Roles disappear. If your identity depends entirely upon things that can change, your peace will always feel fragile. So life eventually asks a deeper question. What remains when the role changes? What remains when someone leaves? What remains when the plan fails? What remains when your appearance changes? What remains when someone misunderstands you? What remains when the world does not confirm the story you have been telling about yourself? If you become still enough, you may begin to sense the answer. Awareness remains. Presence remains. Your capacity to love remains. Your ability to choose again remains. And perhaps your connection with the source remains because it was never dependent upon any external identity in the first place. This is a profound shift. You stop trying to become a more impressive version of yourself and begin becoming more interested in what is true. You become less interested in being admired and more interested in being aligned. You become less interested in being right and more interested in being peaceful. You become less interested in controlling how other people see you and more interested in noticing what you are bringing into each moment. This is how the wounded identity begins losing its authority. Not because you fight it, not because you destroy the ego, but because you stop obeying every thought it produces. The ego often presents itself as protection. It tells you to control everything so you will never be surprised. It tells you to know what everyone thinks of you so you will never be rejected. It tells you to remain angry so you will never become vulnerable again. It tells you to compare yourself constantly so you can determine whether you are doing well enough. It tells you not to forgive because forgiveness might make you weak. These ideas can sound reasonable when fear is speaking. But the cost is enormous. The price is your peace. You can spend years trying to create so much control that pain will never reach you again, only to discover that control has also prevented joy from reaching you. You can become so concerned with avoiding rejection that you never allow yourself to be deeply known. You can become so focused on protecting yourself from disappointment that you stop allowing yourself to hope. You can become so occupied with how others see you that you forget to ask how you feel when you are alone with yourself. Awareness allows you to notice this without making it another reason for self-criticism. There is a significant difference between awareness and judgment. Judgment says, I cannot believe I am doing this again. Awareness says, this pattern is here again. Judgment contracts. Awareness opens. Judgment treats you as a problem. Awareness creates space for understanding. This matters because every pattern you can observe is a pattern you no longer have to automatically follow. A fearful thought appears. You do not have to become afraid of the thought. You can simply notice fear is here. A comparative thought appears. You can notice the mind is measuring my life again. Resentment appears. You can notice part of me is returning to the old story. You do not have to fight any of it. You simply stop handing every passing thought the keys to your life. For many people, comparison is one of the most powerful ways attention is pulled away from peace. You can feel relatively content with your life. Open your phone for 3 minutes, see someone celebrating something you wanted, and suddenly feel as though your entire life is inadequate. Nothing changed except the direction of your attention. The ego created a measurement. They are ahead. You are behind. They are loved. You are forgotten. They succeeded. You failed. But life does not appear to operate according to this measurement system. A rose does not consider itself late because another flower bloomed yesterday. The moon does not become inadequate because the sun is brighter. Winter does not apologize because it does not look like spring. Nature expresses itself without constantly measuring itself against another expression. There may be wisdom in this. Your timing is your timing. Your path is your path. Your healing does not need to resemble someone else's healing. You do not have to arrive at an imaginary destination at the same age as another person. When comparison begins to leave your life, a tremendous amount of energy returns. And with that energy, you begin hearing something that comparison had drowned out. Your own inner guidance. The ego is fascinated by everyone else. What are they doing? What do they think? Are they impressed? Do they approve? Do they regret what happened? Are they talking about you? Do they understand you now? Attention moves outward until you forget that peace is experienced only within your own consciousness. Perhaps someone misunderstands you. The mind immediately wants to correct them. You want to send another message. You want to explain your intention one more time. You want to provide more evidence. You want them to finally see you correctly. Sometimes communication is necessary. Sometimes love requires a conversation. But sometimes the deeper lesson is discovering that not every misunderstanding deserves your energy. Another person is allowed to see you through the limitations of their own perception. That does not make their perception true. It simply means you no longer require control over their mind in order to remain peaceful. Consider how much freedom becomes available when you no longer need everybody to understand you. How much energy returns when you stop rehearsing explanations for people who have already decided what they want to believe. How much lighter does life become when reputation is no longer your spiritual responsibility? This does not mean becoming indifferent to others. It means recognizing the boundary between what belongs to you and what belongs to them. Your intention belongs to you. Your behavior belongs to you. Your integrity belongs to you. Their interpretation belongs to them. There is freedom in understanding the difference. Control becomes even more seductive when the future is uncertain. The mind wants guarantees. Will the relationship survive? Will the problem be resolved? Will the opportunity appear? Will this season end? Will you feel better next year? Will somebody come back? The mind assumes that certainty will create peace. Yet certainty has never really been available. Even during the most stable years of your life, tomorrow was unknown. You simply did not notice because you trusted it. Perhaps peace does not require knowing what will happen. Perhaps peace comes from knowing that you can meet what happens without abandoning yourself. And even that trust can deepen. You can begin trusting that life does not need to reveal the entire road before you take the next step. You can trust that the source has not disappeared simply because the next chapter has not yet become visible. You can trust that uncertainty is not evidence that something has gone wrong. Imagine walking at night with a small lantern. The lantern does not reveal the entire road. It gives enough light for the next few steps. If you insist on seeing 10 miles ahead before moving, you will remain standing in the same place. Life often works this way. You are rarely given the entire map. You are given this moment, this conversation, this choice, this breath. The question becomes less about predicting everything and more about bringing the right quality of consciousness into the step that is available now. You do not need to know everything about the future to know whether you are betraying yourself today. You do not need to know whether a relationship will last forever to know whether there is respect in it now. You do not need to know where your path eventually leads to recognize when fear is forcing you to remain somewhere your spirit has already outgrown. And this is where people-pleasing often becomes visible. Many people learn very early that approval feels like safety. You discover that being easy, useful, agreeable, helpful, or undemanding receives affection. So you become skilled at understanding what everyone else needs. You learn to sense the mood of a room. You learn when to stay silent. You say yes when something inside you is saying no. You apologize for boundaries. You explain your needs as though you are asking permission to exist. Then years later, you wonder why you are exhausted. You wonder why you feel invisible. You wonder why resentment appears toward people you genuinely love. The answer may not be that you need to become less caring. You may simply need to discover a form of love that includes you. Love that continually excludes you will eventually become resentment. You can care without abandoning yourself. You can be compassionate without agreeing with everything. You can disappoint another person and still remain loving. You can say no without turning the other person into an enemy. You can stop rescuing someone and still care deeply about them. The ego may resist this because the ego often equates approval with worth. When someone becomes disappointed in you, an old fear may appear. What if they leave? What if they think you are selfish? What if they stop loving you? Awareness gives you enough space to remain present with that fear. You notice it. You breathe. You allow another person to have their disappointment. And something remarkable happens. You discover that their disappointment did not destroy you. Your worth remains. Your breath remains. Your connection with life remains. The source does not withdraw from you because someone disagrees with your boundary. This is the kind of comeback that happens quietly. Fear does not disappear. You simply stop obeying it automatically. You begin choosing truth over approval, presence over prediction, peace over performance, love over the need to win, and eventually you arrive at resentment. Resentment can feel powerful because it gives pain a purpose. You may believe that remaining angry proves that what happened mattered. You may believe resentment keeps you safe from repeating the past. You may believe forgiveness means the other person gets away with what they did. But resentment has a strange quality. The person may have left your life years ago, but resentment keeps inviting them into your mind. The event is over, yet your nervous system continues experiencing it. You physically leave the situation while emotionally carrying it into every room. Forgiveness does not mean pretending nothing happened. It does not require reconnecting with someone who repeatedly harms you. It does not eliminate wisdom. It does not erase boundaries. Forgiveness is the gradual release of your demand that the past become different before you allow yourself to be free. There is no need to force it. Forced forgiveness is merely another performance. You may not be ready to say, "I forgive." Perhaps you can begin with something more honest. I am willing to stop carrying this forever. That willingness matters. There is a difference between remembering something and carrying it. You can remember betrayal without expecting betrayal from everyone. You can remember abandonment without organizing your life around the fear that everyone will eventually leave. You can remember what happened without allowing it to become the lens through which you interpret every new person. Forgiveness becomes possible when you no longer want yesterday to occupy so much of today. You may never receive the apology you deserve. You may never hear the explanation you wanted. You may never understand why another person behaved as they did. The ego says, then there can be no closure. But closure is not always something another person gives you. Sometimes closure is the decision to stop requiring someone else's participation in your healing. The person who hurt you may have been acting from their own fear, pain, insecurity, conditioning, or lack of awareness. Understanding this does not excuse the behavior. Compassion does not require blindness. But it can help you recognize that another person's inability to love well was never reliable evidence about your worth. Their behavior described their level of awareness. Your mind turned it into a description of you. This is where your identity begins returning home. Instead of asking, why was I not enough for them, you begin asking, why did I allow their limitations to become evidence about my value? That question returns your power, not power over them, power over the story. The story that said rejection meant unworthiness. The story that said being left meant you were unlovable. The story that said one failure predicted the rest of your life. The story that said you were too old, too late, too damaged, or too far behind. Stories become powerful when they remain unconscious. When you see the story clearly, it becomes something you are aware of rather than something you must continue living inside. And the same forgiveness you offer others must eventually include yourself. Self-forgiveness is often more difficult because you know the details. You remember the warnings you ignored. You remember what you tolerated. You remember the person you trusted. You remember opportunities you did not take. You remember what you said when you were angry. You remember the years you believe you wasted. Looking backward with the awareness you have now, the choices of the past may seem obvious. But the person you were then did not know what you know today. You were choosing from the consciousness available to you at that moment. Perhaps you were afraid. Perhaps you desperately wanted to be loved. Perhaps you had never learned how to create boundaries. Perhaps you were repeating something you had seen your entire life. Perhaps you simply did not understand. Can you allow that earlier version of yourself to be human? Can you look at your past without standing above it as a judge? There is wisdom in saying, I would choose differently now, and the fact that I can see that means I have grown. Growth is often visible precisely because your old choices no longer match your current awareness. The mistake does not have to become your identity. Let the lesson remain. Let the punishment end. When forgiveness begins, another spiritual movement becomes possible. Surrender is frequently misunderstood because people confuse it with passivity. They imagine surrender means giving up on a dream, accepting mistreatment, or refusing to take responsibility. But surrender is not the abandonment of action. It is the abandonment of the demand that life follow only one acceptable path. You still make choices. You still work. You still speak. You still create. You still leave what needs to be left. But you stop saying, I can only be peaceful if this one specific outcome occurs. Notice how much fear is contained in that sentence. This relationship must survive. This person must return. This plan must succeed. This opportunity must appear. This person must understand me. My future must look exactly like the picture in my mind. Whenever your peace depends upon one outcome, fear naturally gathers around that outcome. You begin holding more tightly. Then holding tightly creates even more fear. Surrender loosens the grip. It says, I know what I prefer, and I will move toward it with intention, but I do not need to control every detail of how life unfolds. That is not weakness. It is a form of trust. There are probably areas of your life where forcing has exhausted you. You may have tried to save a relationship that required two willing people. You may have tried to obtain love from someone who did not know how to give it. You may have tried to make someone understand something they were not ready to see. You may have pushed yourself to heal according to a timetable because you were ashamed of still hurting. You may have tried to create certainty around something that had not finished unfolding. Eventually, there comes a point when pushing creates no more movement. It only creates resistance. And this is often where a deeper intelligence begins, asking you to loosen your hands. Trust does not mean believing that painful things will never happen. Trust means knowing that pain does not have the final authority over your identity. Trust means understanding that uncertainty is not abandonment. Trust means believing that even when you cannot control the road, you can remain conscious of how you walk it. You can choose honesty. You can choose compassion. You can choose dignity. You can choose patience. You can choose not to betray yourself. You can choose love. This brings us to intention. Intention is often reduced to wanting something strongly enough and hoping the universe will deliver it. But there is a deeper understanding. Intention is not asking the source to satisfy every desire of the ego. Intention is bringing yourself into alignment with the qualities you wish to experience. If you want peace, the question is not merely, how do I get peaceful circumstances? The question becomes, how can I bring peace into this circumstance? If you want love, the question becomes, how can I become more available to loving awareness? If you want respect, the question becomes, am I treating myself and others with dignity? If you want freedom, the question becomes, what am I continuing to hold that is creating my own captivity? This changes intention from a method of controlling life into a way of participating consciously in life. You may wake tomorrow and set an intention to meet yourself gently. You may enter a difficult conversation intending to remain connected to truth without attacking another person. You may walk into uncertainty intending to stay open rather than immediately imagining the worst. You may remember someone who hurt you and decide that their behavior will not become hatred inside your heart. These intentions do not guarantee an outcome. They determine who you are while the outcome is unfolding. That is a much deeper form of power. And there will be days when you forget. You will become irritated. You will worry. You may compare yourself again. You may react defensively. You may say something you wish you had not said. You may spend an hour inside an old story before realizing what has happened. This does not mean your growth disappeared. The spiritual path is not a straight line toward a state in which you never wander again. It is the practice of recognizing when you have wandered and learning to return without punishment. Return to awareness. Return to the breath. Return to love. Return to the present. Return to your intention. You may need to return 1,000 times. That is all right. Every return strengthens your memory of where home is, and home, in this sense, is not a place. It is a quality of consciousness. Love becomes important here because love is far more than an emotion exchanged between two people. Love is a way of seeing. Fear sees danger everywhere. Love sees possibility while remaining wise. Fear asks, how can I make sure nobody ever hurts me again? Love asks, how can I remain open without abandoning discernment? Fear says, I need someone else to confirm that I am worthy. Love remembers that worth is not created by approval. Fear sees separation. Love remembers connection. This does not mean remaining close to everyone. Sometimes love creates distance. Sometimes love says no. Sometimes love ends the conversation. Sometimes love walks away. You do not need hatred to create a boundary. You can recognize that something is not right for you without making another person worthless. You can leave without spending the next 5 years trying to prove that leaving was justified. You can protect your peace without building your identity around an enemy. This is one of the most freeing movements in spiritual maturity. You begin seeing beyond the categories the ego loves. Good person, bad person, winner, loser, right, wrong. Human beings are more complicated. Someone may care about you and still be incapable of treating you well. Someone may disappoint you without being completely evil. You may have made serious mistakes without being permanently defined by them. Compassion allows complexity, and compassion does not remove discernment. It removes poison. Perhaps this is why forgiveness and boundaries can exist together. You can wish someone peace from a distance. You can understand their wounds without volunteering to be wounded by them again. You can let go internally while still saying no externally. This is what love looks like when awareness is present. There is another surrender that becomes important for many people as life unfolds. It is the surrender of the life you believed you would have by now. Perhaps you imagined being somewhere else at this age. You thought you would have a different relationship, a different family, a different level of success, a different body, a different home, a different amount of money, a different level of certainty. When reality does not match the picture, there is real grief. But beneath the grief, there is often another layer of suffering. You are not only experiencing the life that exists, you are comparing it with an imaginary life that never occurred. The mind keeps placing reality beside the picture and announcing that reality is wrong. Acceptance interrupts that argument. Acceptance does not mean you stop dreaming. It does not mean you lose ambition. It does not mean you refuse to change what can be changed. Acceptance means you stop refusing to inhabit the life that is actually here. You begin seeing this day before, immediately measuring it against another day. And when you do that, you begin noticing what remains. A morning, a breath, a body still carrying you, a person who cares, a chance to speak differently, a chance to apologize, a chance to forgive, a chance to sit quietly, a chance to notice beauty, a chance to begin again. This is where gratitude becomes something more than a positive thinking exercise. Gratitude is not denying pain. It is refusing to let pain become the only thing you can see. You may be grieving and still notice a beautiful sky. You may be uncertain and still receive kindness. You may be healing and still laugh. Life does not postpone every moment of grace until all your problems have disappeared. Grace continues arriving. The question is whether you are available to notice it. For years, you may have told yourself, I will live when this is fixed, when the relationship becomes better, when money improves, when I feel confident, when I finally understand what happened, when I stop being afraid. But life is not waiting. Life is already here. You do not need a perfect internal condition before you are allowed to experience peace. Peace can exist beside unanswered questions. Peace can exist beside grief. Peace can exist during transition. Peace does not always mean difficulty has disappeared. Sometimes peace is simply the end of your argument with the fact that difficulty is present. You soften around the moment. You stop demanding immediate resolution. You allow yourself to breathe without solving your entire life. And in that opening, you may begin sensing something larger than the problem. Some call it God, some call it spirit, some call it source. Perhaps you experience it simply as the quiet intelligence within life. Whatever language you use, the invitation is similar. You do not have to behave as though the entire universe depends upon your ability to control it. You participate. You do not control everything. A wave participates in the ocean, but it does not need to create the ocean. A leaf participates in the life of a tree without carrying responsibility for the entire forest. You participate in life. You bring your intention. You bring your awareness. You bring your choices. You bring your willingness to love. Then you allow life to move. This does not make you powerless. It places your power where it actually exists. You cannot choose every event that arrives. You can become more conscious of what you bring to the event. You cannot control another person's mind. You can decide whether you will abandon yourself in order to influence it. You cannot know every future outcome. You can choose whether fear or awareness leads the next step. And as you begin living this way, relationships change. You stop entering every room asking, do they like me? You begin asking, am I connected to myself while I am here? You stop asking, how do I make this person stay? You begin asking, is love asking me to remain, or is fear asking me not to leave? You stop asking, how do I make sure I am never hurt again? You begin asking, how do I stay open while respecting what experience has taught me? You stop living from the assumption that everybody else knows something about you that you do not. You begin trusting the quiet intelligence within. There may be someone in your life right now whose behavior you desperately want to change. You have explained yourself. You have tried to help. You have worried. You have replayed every possibility. You have offered advice that was not received. At some point, love may ask you to release the illusion that you can live someone else's life for them. You can care. You can speak honestly. You can be present. But you cannot awaken for another person. You cannot heal for them. You cannot make them ready. You cannot force awareness into a mind that is still committed to another way of seeing. There is humility in accepting this. And there is enormous freedom. You give their path back to them. Then you return to your own. This is letting go without ceasing to love. It is releasing control rather than releasing compassion. And when control begins to soften, you may suddenly notice something surprising. Your comeback has already started, not because the outside world transformed overnight, but because you are no longer relating to the world in the same way. Something that once triggered 3 days of overthinking may now last 3 hours, then perhaps 30 minutes. A person who once controlled your emotional state no longer occupies your mind every morning. You feel less urgency to explain yourself. You compare less. You recognize fear sooner. You create boundaries without the same amount of guilt. You forgive more quickly. You become more comfortable with silence. You rest without believing rest must be earned. These changes may never impress anyone. They may never become visible on social media. But these are the changes that reveal genuine freedom. Your history is becoming wisdom instead of identity. There comes a point when you stop asking, how do I return to who I used to be? And you become grateful that you do not have to, because the person emerging now may be quieter, less reactive, less interested in proving, more willing to listen, more willing to release, more willing to trust, more willing to love without possession, more willing to forgive without abandoning wisdom, more willing to be present without demanding that the present become something else first. This is not necessarily becoming somebody new. It may simply be discovering what fear had been covering. The deepest truths become meaningful when they enter ordinary life. It is easy to feel peaceful while hearing beautiful words about love, surrender, and awareness. The practice begins when the phone rings, when someone disappoints you, when plans change, when you see something that awakens comparison, when an old memory appears at midnight, when uncertainty returns. That is where your comeback becomes real. Tomorrow morning, you may wake up and feel anxious before your feet even touch the floor. The mind may immediately begin creating the day. What needs to be done? What could go wrong? Who has not responded? What if something happens? Instead of following the first thought immediately, remain still for a moment. Feel the breath entering the body. Notice that before the story begins, you are already here. There is awareness before worry. There is presence before the list of problems. There is life before your opinion about life. You do not need an elaborate ritual. A few conscious breaths can sometimes remind you that you are larger than the first thought that appears in the morning. You might quietly ask, what would this day feel like if I did not carry yesterday into it? Do not force an answer. Let the question open a little space. Stillness has power because the ego depends on constant movement, planning, remembering, defending, comparing, predicting. Silence interrupts the momentum. And beneath the noise, you may begin sensing something that does not speak in urgency. It may simply remind you that you do not have to hurry. You do not have to solve everything today. You do not have to know how the entire story ends. You do not have to prove that your healing is working. Then move through the day with awareness. Notice when your body becomes tense. Notice when you begin seeking approval. Notice comparison. Notice the desire to defend yourself immediately. Notice when your imagination turns one uncertain situation into 10 imaginary disasters. You are not trying to become perfect. You are becoming conscious. The moment you can say, I notice I am leaving my peace, you have already created the doorway back. Then return. Return to the breath. Return to what is actually happening. Return to the body. Return to the present conversation rather than the imaginary conversation. There will be days when you remember quickly. There will be days when you spend hours inside an old pattern before you notice. Do not make spiritual awareness another standard with which to judge yourself. The moment you notice is the moment you can return. You did not fail because you wandered. You simply forgot. Then you remembered. That may be the entire path. Gratitude can help you remember. At the end of a day, notice something that asks nothing from you. Light through a window, the taste of water, a conversation, the sound of rain, a quiet room, a few minutes when the mind softened. The fact that you survived another day you once believed might be too difficult. The ego wants dramatic evidence that life is changing. But peace often enters through very small openings. When you begin noticing what is present instead of measuring only what is missing, something fundamental changes in your relationship with life. You stop asking, when will my life begin? You realize you are already inside it. Forgiveness can become part of this ordinary practice as well. When irritation appears, notice it before immediately building a story around it. When resentment returns, ask yourself whether carrying it for another hour is serving anything inside you. You may discover that you are not ready to release it yet. Be honest. Honesty is more spiritual than pretending. You can say, I am still hurt, and I am willing to become free. There is no need to hurry. Healing performed for an audience is still performance. Let it be real. Let forgiveness take the time it requires. What matters is that you begin recognizing that holding pain and honoring yourself are not the same thing. You can honor what happened without rebuilding the experience every morning. You can maintain a boundary without rehearsing hatred. You can remember the lesson while allowing the wound to become quieter. And if the person you need to forgive is yourself, remember that punishment cannot change the past. You know more now. Use that awareness differently. Ask what love would teach you from the experience. Then allow the lesson to remain while shame begins to leave. This is how the past becomes wisdom. Trust must also become a practice because uncertainty will return. There will always be unanswered questions. People will change. Plans will fail. Unexpected doors will open. Others will close. New beginnings may appear before you feel prepared. Fear will visit. But perhaps you can learn to say, I do not know what happens next, but I do not need to abandon myself while I wait. That is trust. Trust is not certainty. Trust is presence in the absence of certainty. You can trust yourself to meet tomorrow when tomorrow arrives. You can trust that tonight does not require tomorrow's answers. You can trust that the source is not absent simply because the path has become unclear. There are seasons in which very little seems to be happening. You may feel delayed, hidden, uncertain. Do not immediately assume that stillness means nothing is occurring. A seed beneath the soil looks inactive from above, yet transformation is happening in darkness. Roots are forming before anything becomes visible. Your life may contain seasons like this. You may be learning patience. You may be releasing a role. You may be discovering which desires belong to your deepest self and which belong to the need to impress. You may be discovering that peace requires fewer conditions than you once believed. Your comeback may already be unfolding beneath the surface, and one of the clearest signs may not be what you have gained. It may be what you no longer need. You no longer need everybody to understand you. You no longer need revenge. You no longer need to know whether someone regrets losing you. You no longer need every uncertainty resolved tonight. You no longer need your life to resemble somebody else's before you allow yourself to value it. You no longer need to win every argument. You no longer need to turn every mistake into a judgment about your character. You no longer need to control everything before you can breathe. This is freedom, not freedom from every difficult experience. Freedom from the belief that every difficult experience has the power to define you. You begin remembering that something deeper has been present through all of it. Through heartbreak, through rejection, through mistakes, through nights of overthinking, through years when you felt lost, through identities you tried desperately to maintain. There was always an awareness within you witnessing the experience. And perhaps that witnessing presence is closer to who you truly are than any story you have ever constructed about yourself. If that is true, then your comeback was never about becoming stronger than the person who was wounded. It was about realizing that the wounded person was never the whole of you. There is more to you than what happened. There is more to you than what somebody said. There is more to you than what you lost. There is more to you than what you failed to become. There is awareness. There is love. There is the capacity to choose again. There is the ability to begin without rejecting what came before. And there is a relationship with the source that does not depend upon your age achievements, relationship status, appearance, past, or reputation. You do not earn your way back into that relationship. You remember it, perhaps in one conscious breath, perhaps in one act of forgiveness, perhaps in one moment when you choose peace instead of proving, perhaps in one decision to stop arguing with reality, perhaps in one quiet expression of gratitude. Then tomorrow, you remember again. Spiritual living does not have to mean living without difficulty. It can simply mean knowing where to return when difficulty arrives. You return to awareness. You return to love. You return to stillness. You return to the present moment. You return to the part of yourself that does not require another person's defeat in order to feel whole. And when you forget, you return again. There is no shame in returning 1,000 times. Every morning arrives after another night. The seasons change and return without apology. The ocean moves toward the shore again and again. Perhaps you can offer yourself the same grace. If you came into this moment believing your comeback meant proving that life had not defeated you, allow yourself to consider something gentler. You have nothing to prove. The peaceful presence within you does not need applause. The source within you does not require permission from another person. Your healing does not become real because someone notices it. It becomes real when you notice that you carry less fear, less resentment, less need for approval, less desire to control what cannot be controlled, and more willingness to meet life as it is, more willingness to love, more willingness to forgive, more willingness to trust, more willingness to be here. Maybe that is your comeback. It is not going backward. It is coming home. Coming home to the awareness that you are not your wounds. Coming home to the love beneath the fear. Coming home to the stillness beneath the noise. Coming home to the presence that existed before the stories and will remain after the stories have changed. You do not need to chase your way back to yourself. You do not need to prove that you survived. You do not need to become extraordinary before you deserve peace. Take a breath. Feel the life that is already here. Allow your shoulders to soften. Allow this moment to be enough. The person you thought you had lost may never need to return. Something deeper has been waiting. Something quieter. Something that never needed the world to confirm its worth. And perhaps your greatest comeback begins the moment you finally remember. You were never completely gone. You were never only the wound. You were never only the story. Beneath everything you have been through, the peaceful presence within you remained, and it is still here. You are already here.